Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Welcome into another edition of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. It is Monday, November 16th. Thanks for listening in, everyone. Hopefully you guys had a great weekend out there. I know I did. Man, I had to get the two TVs going for the entire weekend. The Masters was taking place on the one television, and then Saturday, college football, Sunday, NFL football. It was just fantastic action out there. If you're a sports fan, I know I certainly enjoyed it. Was able to win a couple of wagers on multiple events, so it was certainly a positive weekend out there, and hopefully it was the same for all of you listening. So welcome in. We got a great show lined up for you here today. We're going to talk about the MVP awards that were handed out at the end of last week. I'll give you my take on next year, who could win the award. And then in segments 2 and 3, we'll talk about the new general manager hires that took place by the Marlins and the Angels in the past couple of days. I'll also give you guys an update on what's going on in Philadelphia with their general manager search. Nobody is really sure what's going on. A couple of people have had some hot takes about the Phillies that we'll discuss. And then in the last segment, we'll talk about rumors, news, notes, kind of everything going on across baseball that, doesn't take place or has anything to do with today, but more so next year, off-season moves, rules, and things along those lines. So thanks for tuning in once again today. I certainly appreciate it. Let's jump right in here. MVP awards were handed out, and I was 8 for 8 on winners. So hopefully you guys have been listening over the past couple of weeks and went to your local sports book if you're located in a state where that is allowed. Obviously, one of our partners here, Rivers Casino. I myself in Pennsylvania, it is legal, so I was able to put some action down on the award winners and win a couple of bucks over the past week or so. But starting out in the American League, Jose Abreu of the Chicago White Sox won the award. He got 21 of 30 first-place votes. He finished with 374 total points. Jose Ramirez was in second place from the Cleveland Indians. He received 8 first-place votes for 303 points. And then in third place, DJ LeMahieu, followed by Shane Bieber and Mike Trout, rounding out your top 5. So I've heard a couple of takes about Jose Abreu and individuals thinking that Jose Ramirez should have won the award, but my prediction. I thought Jose was going to win it. He became the 4th White Sox player to win the award, joining Frank Thomas, who won it back-to-back years in 93 and 94. Dick Allen won the award in 1972, and Nellie Fox in 1959. So the 4th award for the Chicago White Sox, or 5th award, 4th overall player for the White Sox. But Jose Abreu became the 3rd Cuban-born player to win an MVP. He joins the likes of Zolio Versalles and Jose Canseco as the other 2 individuals who were born in Cuba to be able to do that. So a fantastic year for Jose Ramirez, but he came up just short. Ramirez, he hit, this year he hit 292 with 17 home runs and 46 RBIs. It was his late season charge, his excellent September, that put him into the conversation. He would have been the first Indians player to win the award since Al Rosen in 1953. So the Indians have had quite a long drought when it comes to the MVP award, but DJ LeMahieu finished in 3rd. He led the majors with a 364 batting average. So, of course, your Cy Young winner, Shane Bieber, in fourth, and then overall best player in baseball, Mike Trout, finishing fifth. But Jose Abreu winning the award was a bit of an old school win. And that's where I still believe, especially in the shortened season, RBIs, batting average, they carried a lot more weight than some of the other metrics that go into the wins above replacements or the WAR metric, because Jose Ramirez led the WAR by a score of 3.4 to Abreu's 2.6. But a lot of this has to do with defensive metrics, with base running metrics. Ramirez is a much better base runner than Abreu. But when you just look at the stat line, kind of the old school batting average, home runs, RBIs, that's where Ramirez or Abreu really stands apart, because his 60 RBIs in 60 games, of course, equates to a fantastic year of 162, because those were the most RBIs in the first 60 games of a season since Miguel Cabrera drove in 67 back in 2013. And if I'm not mistaken, that was Miguel Cabrera's Triple Crown year. So for Jose Abreu to get close to that level of play is certainly one of the reasons why his 2020 season was most impressive. But Jose, let's see, a deeper dive will take you into the fact that he hit extremely well with runners on base. He had 120 at-bats this year with runners on base, and he hit 333 with 48 RBIs. So Abreu was very clutch during the 2020 season. That's what that statistic shows me. When the game was on the line or they were having the ability to drive in runs, Abreu stepped up to the plate and delivered for his team, because he also had a 22-game hitting streak this year. And that's another quality streak that's added to, the list of accomplishments or the list of resume for Jose Abreu this year. So I know some people out there having the conversation of defensive metrics, base running statistics, and we'll get into this even a little bit further here with our National League conversation. So, let's do that now, because the top two in the National League were Freddie Freeman and Mookie Betts. That was the conversation that was being had. Those were the candidates that were really being discussed as 1-2, and the voters almost unanimously, with 28 out of 30 first-place votes, gave the award to Freddie Freeman of the Atlanta Braves. And once again, I predicted this, and I thought this was going to take place, but Mookie Betts received the other 2 first-place votes and then 21 second-place votes to finish in second place. But this is where I wanted to talk to you guys about defensive metrics, base running statistics, because just by the numbers, looking at Freeman and Betts, and these are the numbers that I went off of, where average, home runs, RBIs, Betts hit 292 this past season, where Freeman hit 341. Betts had 16 home runs. Freeman had 13 home runs, which certainly puts him in that conversation. And that's close enough to basically say, okay, they both hit for power this year. But when you dive into kind of the defensive statistics, base running statistics, because when you look at the wins above replacements, again, here in the National League, Mookie Betts had a 3.4 WAR, and Freddie Freeman had a 2.9 WAR. And that has a lot to do with the base running, because Mookie Betts had, I believe it was 10 stolen bases this year, and Freddie Freeman only had 2. As well as defensively, Freeman posted a 0 defensive run saved at first base, a DRS that we've talked on here in the past couple of episodes. And Mookie Betts had 11 defensive runs saved in right field. And we saw this again in the playoffs. Betts taking away a couple of home runs. So basically, if you encompass the all-around game, defense, base running, offense, this is where the wins above replacements favors Ramirez and Betts. But if you look at old school statistics, this is where Freeman and Abreu basically carried these numbers. And it's real fascinating when you kind of look at it. But Freddie Freeman as well, coming off of his coronavirus, that he had, I'm looking at a positive test, I guess is a good way to put it, because man, some people talking about how are people going to bounce back? How does it affect you physically, mentally? And, Freeman was super impressive. And I think that was another feather in his cap because it did take him a couple of weeks to get going offensively. But once he did, man, he was really tough to get out this year. Freddie Freeman did. He finished second in OPS, only to Juan Soto, who was excellent. And then that 1.102 is higher than Cody Bellinger's last year. It's slightly higher than Christian Yelich's last year. So that puts him right up at the top of the list with, past winners and that conversation. Freeman also hitting the number 2 spot for the Braves, which, of course, gets him more at-bats. And when he was hitting second, Freeman hit .390 compared to a .295 average when he hit third in the lineup. So they moved him up. They found success. He saw a few more fastballs with the likes of Acuna and Ozuna hitting behind him, so he was protected in the lineup all year, but so was Mookie Betts. So that, that's not a conversation that you could sway one way or the other. But certainly Freddie Freeman deserving of the award, and I had him winning the award, finishing 341, 53 RBIs in 60 games. He also led the majors with 23 doubles and 51 runs scored. So not only hitting for power, but hitting for doubles. He was the 6th different player in franchise history to win the award. Freddie Freeman and the Braves. Chipper Jones, most recently, took home the honor in 1999. Let's see, 2-time NL MVP Dale Murphy, also of the Atlanta Braves, was a previous winner. So Freddie Freeman winning the award just goes to show how well Atlanta is set up for 2021 and into the future, because we always talk about the young kids. We always talk about how they're set, how they've signed contracts that are going to be team-friendly. And then you have the old guy, the stalwart through the rebuild, Freddie Freeman, just continuing to show up year after year, continuing to mash baseballs, and I think it's just going to be, fun to watch here in the future. But 2021 MVP predictions or favorites here as we wrap up this segment. I mean, you got to go with the standard cast of characters, right? Like, Mookie Betts is going to be right there at the top of the list in the National League. Of course, you have Freddie Freeman, who would be looking to repeat for the award. You have Manny Machado, who was at the top of the list. You got Fernando Tatis Jr., and, all of these guys continuing to progress. None of them are really at the tail end of their career. So it's a conversation that I think entails a lot of different prospects and a lot of different players, because you also have this offseason, you're going to have some movement. I mean, guys are going to go from the National League to the American League and vice versa. We saw Mookie Betts do it and still be in the MVP conversation at the end of the year. But, I mean, early money for me, I like Juan Soto. Well, what he did this year, only playing in 47 games, I think hindered him, because if he had played a full 60 and continued on the pace where he was, he would have been right up there in the conversation. You have Marcell Ozuna possibly in the conversation. Bryce Harper could have a bounce-back year in Philadelphia. I touched on it in Thursday's episode, where Manager of the Year basically is given to managers whose teams exceed expectations. Well, if the Phillies come in once again with down expectations, if they don't have a good offseason and retain Real Muto or add George Springer or make another move, and Harper goes off and carries this team to the postseason, he's going to be right up there in the conversation for the National League, and somebody that, I think could be a long shot, because the odds, I don't think, are going to be in his favor for 2021 at the start of the year. So in the American League, of course, you have Abreu coming back, Ramirez, DJ LeMahieu, depending on where he ends up, will certainly be in the conversation if it's National League or American League. Nelson Cruz will continue to get votes, but it'll be difficult for him to win the award because of the designated hitter role. I don't think voters have, fully crossed that threshold of giving this award to somebody who doesn't play defense. But, Mike Trout, obviously in the conversation. Where does Francisco Lindor end up? So all of these guys are going to be right there again in the conversation. And, depending on the odds, you could certainly get a good value for the 2021 season. But 8 for 8 on the awards, guys. I mean, hopefully you've been listening. We nailed every one of them. Now, I will say, again, depending on your opinion, maybe it's not what you think should have happened, but ultimately I'm here to tell you what's going to happen, because the Baseball Writers Association of America hands out these awards, and based on the clientele and the demographics within that world, you can kind of begin to learn and understand how they're feeling and which way they're going to swing, and ultimately how they're going to place their votes. But that wraps up the awards for 2020. It was a lot of fun talking about who won and ultimately giving you my way too early predictions for the 2021 season that I'm sure will change throughout the offseason here. But that'll wrap it up for the first segment here of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. Thanks again for listening, everyone. We'll step aside right now for a word from one of our sponsors and one of our sister shows. But when we come back, we're going to get into our general manager conversation. We'll start out with the Marlins, then we'll talk about the Angels. So stick around, everyone. We'll be right back.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. Man, what a Masters tournament that was this weekend. That was a ton of fun to watch. Bryson DeChambeau going out there, hitting the ball long, but all over the place, almost missing the cut. Then he makes the cut. Tigers in contention, but falls off on Saturday. There was a ton going on this weekend, and I had a ton of fun watching it. College football, NFL as well. So if you guys are fans of different sports out there, check out other shows within the GSMC Podcast Network. There's a college football show, fantasy football, NFL football, sports in general. There was some boxing, MMA that took place this past weekend. So check out those episodes. And if you're not into sports, you're just kind of a baseball fan who enjoys other things, well, there's news, politics, relationships, anything and everything. Movies, music, cars. Check it out. Just type in GSMC into the search icon wherever you get your podcasts, and you'll see quite a few different shows pop up that you can follow and listen to, and they're all fantastic. A lot of talented hosts within the network, so please support the other shows, the other podcasts. We certainly appreciate it here within the network. But jumping in here now to segment number 2, and the Miami Marlins made history over the past week. They hired Kim Ng to be their general manager. And the reason why they made history, they broke quite a few barriers with this hire, because Kim Ng is the first female general manager in Major League Baseball. She is also the first female general manager of any of the 4 major sports teams. So not only baseball, but the NHL, NFL, NBA, none of them have had a female general manager, as well as she is the first Asian American general manager in Major League Baseball history. So 3 barriers are broken with one hire by Derek Jeter, who had previously broken a barrier himself when in 2017 he became the first black CEO to run a Major League Baseball team. So the Marlins are just very progressive, very forward-thinking, but that certainly doesn't mean that they skimped on qualifications or anything like that. I don't want that to come off here, because I did some research into Kim Ng, and I'm going to share with you guys her background and where she's been, what she's been doing, because when I saw this, me probably, ignorant to what's going on across all of Major League Baseball. But I was just like, who? What has she done? Oh, okay. And the more you read, the more you listen, the more you understand how qualified Kim is and how she, her resume, speaks for itself. So looking back at her history, she grew up in New York. She grew up in Long Island. She was a Yankees fan, although she grew up closer to Queens and the New York Mets, so people like to point out. But she basically states because her dad was a sports nut and he was a big Yankees fan, so she enjoyed them growing up. But she was a softball player in her career. She attended the University of Chicago, where she played on the Maroon softball team for all 4 years and had a successful career there in college as a softball player. And then she began her career upon graduation in 1990. So she started out with the Chicago White Sox, where she was brought on in 1990, like I said, and then on a full-time basis in 1991. So she was with the White Sox from 90 to 96, and by 1995, she was the club's assistant director of baseball operations. So she was able to work her way up from an intern all the way to assistant director of baseball operations, which is very impressive to begin with. And then in 1997, she decided to leave the White Sox and work for Major League Baseball and essentially be the American League, be in the front office. She was the director of waivers and records, basically approving transaction, helping with the application rules. She was also the first woman to be part of the arbitration process as she continued throughout her career. So after 1997 with the American League, she then went to go work with the New York Yankees. Of course, that was a first at the time for females. She was the first female assistant general manager, and this was only at the age of 29 years old. So very successful throughout the entirety of her career. She became the youngest person to be an assistant GM. So not only the first female, but the youngest person at that time to be an assistant GM. And during her time with the Yankees, from 1998 through 2001, she won 3 World Series rings as an executive and made the playoffs in all 4 years. So a very successful tenure with the New York Yankees. She then, in the 2002 season, so after 2001, went to go work for the LA Dodgers, where she became vice president and assistant general manager. So she got another promotion, added vice president to her title there. She worked with the Dodgers through the 2010 offseason. With the Dodgers, they had 4 more postseason appearances, of course, falling short. Everybody knows that they hadn't won a World Series since 1988, since this past year, but LA continued to be very successful during her time there. She was part of the decision-making conversations on player transactions. That included trades, free agency. She also oversaw pro scouting, among other departments. During her time there, she was also interim farm director as well, so had quite a bit of success with the Dodgers as well, doing a ton of jobs internally. Very impressive. So Ang is one of 4 women who hold or held assistant general manager title in baseball as well. There was Elaine Weddington Stewart with the Red Sox, Raquel Ferreira with the Red Sox, and Jean Afterman with the Yankees throughout the course of Major League Baseball. So Ang was one of only 4 females to get to the assistant general manager spot, and now she is the first female to get the general manager title. But after her time with the LA Dodgers in 2011 for the 2012 season, Ang joined Major League Baseball once again. This time, she was the Senior Vice President of Baseball Operations. She reported directly to Chief Baseball Officer Joe Torre, and thus becoming the highest-ranking woman in the commissioner's office. And she had done that for the past 10 years. So she was with Major League Baseball as a Senior VP from 2011 through 2020, and that is just very impressive. And throughout the course of her career, throughout the course of those 30 years in baseball, again, 3 World Series titles, 6 League Championship Series appearances, 8 postseason appearances as a whole. But dating back all the way to 2005 is when she first interviewed for a general manager's opportunity. So Ang has been interviewing over the course of the last 15 years before finally getting this opportunity. So for those of you out there, whether you're male, female, whatever your age is, if you're at work and you're thinking, man, I've been so close to that job I've always wanted, I've been so close to that promotion, just think about how Ang, and it took her 15 years after that initial interview to ultimately gain the position that she was trying to get and that she was certainly qualified for. And over 15 years, she had interviewed with more than 6 teams. I mean, I have 6 right in front of me, but I know there are others that she's had conversations with. Let's see here. The teams that she had interviewed with in the past: the New York Mets, the Philadelphia Phillies, San Francisco Giants, the LA Dodgers during her time there as assistant GM, the Seattle Mariners, and the San Diego Padres, just to name a few, that are available via public here in 2020. So, Kim Ang, just very, very impressive with her resume. And the more you talk to people, the more you understand her relationship with Derek Jeter. Obviously goes back quite some time. They were both there with the Yankees back in the late 90s. Jeter, of course, winning those World Series as the shortstop. But now you know Kim Ang was the assistant GM and having conversations and interactions behind the scenes. So Derek Jeter, wasn't getting his first opportunity to meet with Kim Ang when they were having the interview. They have quite a bit of history and quite a bit of a track record. But again, I don't think this one has the feel, and it certainly hasn't had the pushback or the reaction of the Jerry Reisendorf, Tony La Russa connection that just happened for the White Sox. It certainly feels like Kim Ang, is long overdue to get this opportunity moving forward. But the Miami Marlins, yes, they're set up nicely, I would say, moving forward. We saw in the 2020 season, they exceeded expectations. Don Mattingly named Manager of the Year. They dealt with a coronavirus outbreak and still finished over 500 to make the playoffs. However, they did have a negative run differential. So the Marlins were that standard team that would win by 1 and lose by 5. So at the end of the week, they'd be 6-4 with a -10 run differential because the 6 wins were by 1 or 2 runs and the 4 losses were by 3 or 4 runs. But the core is there in Miami. We've seen on the mound, of course, they have a ton of stud arms. Alcantara, as well as Sixto Sanchez at the top of that rotation, both young, both immensely talented. Just need to keep everybody healthy, and they should be set when it comes to the rotation. They exercised Sterling Castro's offseason option for $12 million, so he'll remain in Miami next year. I think that was a no-brainer when it comes to price and, the return on investment that you received from that trade. They have since declined Kinsler's $4 million option, so he will not be back unless it will be at a cheaper price moving forward. And I don't think that's out of the question because Kim Ang's first couple of decisions when it comes to the on-field talent and the team that she's trying to look at is, first is behind the dish. Of course, you have Jorge Alfaro, who was part of that Sixto Sanchez trade coming over from the Phillies. He's been traded a couple of times in his career. But down the stretch last year, Chad Wallach handled the duties because he was much better defensively. Alfaro's catcher framing metrics of 41.3 are not very good and really at the bottom of the list when it comes to starting catchers. He does have a cannon of an arm and a plus bat offensively, but he continues to be hampered by the swing and miss and the defensive metrics that when you're looking at a team with a plus starting pitching rotation, you would rather have a defender back there who can call a game and the pitchers can rely on and don't have to be hesitant to throw those above-average breaking balls and off-speed pitches in the dirt with fear of giving up extra bases behind them. So beyond the catching position and the starting rotation, you obviously have the bullpen. Kinsler, like I mentioned, will not be back. Brad Boxberger, who was used as a primary setup guy for them, is also a free agent. That means that kind of leaves them with Yimi Garcia as an in-house option. They have prospect Jordan Holloway, who's also spent some time in the bullpen. But I think this is a team down in Miami that could be active when it comes to the margins. And that's a saying here in Philadelphia that we hate to hear because it's a small market philosophy and not a big team, big payroll, New York Yankees, LA Dodgers kind of conversation, but more of a Moneyball, Oakland Athletics, Miami Marlins conversation where looking at the market and a potential flooding of the market that could be happening here very shortly, and we'll discuss that briefly in the fourth segment, but the non-tender date for arbitration-eligible players is coming up here in the next couple of weeks, and I believe there are going to be quite a few names that if there wasn't a pandemic or a coronavirus going on, they would be a no-brainer tender candidate, but with the monetary obligations and nobody really has any idea what arbitration and that process is going to look like, there are going to be quite a few names hit the market that ultimately would not in a typical offseason. And with more supply and less demand, the price goes down, right? Economics 101, supply and demand. So the top guys at the top of the market will be fine, but it's that middle tier and lower tier that I think that could become flooded. And Kim Ng, with her time with the Yankees and Dodgers, certainly understands how to win with money behind you and at the high level. But the two things those teams do well is supplement that talent with good drafting and internal development to allow them to have the staying power at the top of the divisions that they've had for decades plus. So shout out to the Marlins for hiring Kim Ng, first female GM in baseball, first female GM in any of the four major sports, and then the first Asian American GM in baseball. And lastly, I want to mention that the Marlins also have a female COO. Her name is Carolyn O'Connor. So that means two of the three top execs for the Miami Marlins are now female alongside Derek Jeter. So pushing the envelope, shattering barriers, shattering ceilings, I'm all for it, and I'm certainly rooting for Kim Ng to be successful here moving forward. But that'll do it here for the second segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. We'll pause right now and step aside for a word from one of our sponsors, but when we come back, we'll talk about the Angels hire at GM and if the Phillies are going to do anything or if they're just going to sit back and watch this entire offseason. So we'll discuss that and more. Stick around, everyone. We'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. It's Monday, November 16th. We're creeping ever so closer to the Thanksgiving holiday coming up here at the end of next week. So depending on when you're listening to this, could be 8, 9, even 10 days away. So I want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving, happy holiday seasons coming up here over the next couple of months. And hopefully everybody out there stays safe with the coronavirus numbers spiking across the country. Please stay safe with your family members. Do what you can. I know I myself am getting a little stir-crazy, but trying to be respectful of others, not do too much out there, and keep everybody's health and safety concern number one. But let's jump into our conversation here, continued conversation around the general manager openings across Major League Baseball. We just discussed Kim Ng being hired in Miami. Well, the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim have made a hire as well, and they have hired Perry Minasian, I believe is how you say it, and he was the Braves' assistant general manager for the past couple of years, and I won't say this is a surprising hire. You know, when you get to the general manager level, there's typically a handful of organizations that you like to hire from or have your person or candidate have experience with. We saw this case in point with Kim Ng. Her time with the Dodgers and the Yankees, they certainly checked those boxes. And then Minasian and his time with the Braves over the past handful of years is certainly impressive as well with what they've done recently with drafting, international signings, prospects, as well as their free agency moves and the like to subsequent that talent that has led to their continued development and multiple NL East titles here. So Perry in L.A., they agreed to a 4-year contract over the next couple of years. Minasian will replace Billy Epler, who was let go after this past season, and it is known that Minasian was one of 20 candidates that the Angels had talked to, and he was one of about 5 or 6 that made it to the second round of the interview process. A couple of the others that were in the mix: Cubs Senior Vice President Jason McLeod, Diamondbacks Assistant GMs Jared Porter and Emil Sauday, and Mariners Assistant GM Justin Hollander. So a couple of different options there. Personally, the Cubs, D-backs, Mariners, you know, that gets into the conversation of, are you bringing in somebody who's coming from Seattle, who struggled the past couple of years? So certainly Minasian had a impressive interview process to be hired for the opportunity. But Minasian has a long history background within baseball. He's only 40 years old, but looks like he spent the majority of his life within the baseball world, because he even began as the bat boy for the Texas Rangers when he was 8 years old. Minasian's father, Zach, was the Rangers' longtime clubhouse manager. So Perry served as the bat boy and clubhouse attendant for 15 years during his time in his teens and into his early 20s. He then spent the next 6 years as an advanced scout and a staff assistant for Buck Showalter, who was the Rangers manager at the time. So went from bat boy to clubhouse attendant to scout and assistant for Buck Showalter. He then spent 9 seasons with the Toronto Blue Jays. So he went from the Texas Rangers over to the Blue Jays, where he was the director of pro scouting for 6 of those 9 years. And in 2 years of that run, in 2015 and 2016, that's when the Blue Jays made their run to back-to-back ALCS championship series. So when he was in charge of scouting, that's when the Blue Jays had their most success, which certainly put him on the radar for teams to add him. And that's when he was added by the Braves. Former Braves GM John Copella in 2017 added him as a top advisor. Then Copella was forced to resign regarding rule violations of the international market. Then Alex Santhopoulos took over as the new VP, and he elevated Minasian to VP of Baseball Operations and Assistant GM. So that's where he's been over the past couple of years. Now the Angels decide to bring him on, and honestly, I think this Angels GM job is a tougher job than the Marlins GM job. And there's a lot that goes into that. The Angels, of course, have money. They're in a big market. They have the television contracts. You have Mike Trout on the roster. You have top-end talent that you're able to market and sell to the surrounding areas, as opposed to Miami, who, like I mentioned, is a small market team. Not a lot of fan support locally, although they do have a brand new stadium. They've always struggled to put fannies in the seats. So certainly this Angels job is now without its hurdles because, yes, the next couple of years are going to be big, right? So you have the final season of Albert Pujols coming up this next year, the last year of that 10-year, $240 million deal. You have 2 more years of Justin Upton's deal, which was 5 years and $105 million. Both of those guys have certainly been disappointments here towards the end of the life of those contracts. Yes, they had a couple good years in there, but certainly both of those signings look to be in the disappointment category more so than the positive category. And then when you're looking at 2023, the only people you have on the books are Mike Trout and Anthony Rendon. Now, you will have arbitration guys at that point, Ohtani, Fletcher, Canning, but certainly the money committed long-term is not there for the Angels once they got out of, these next couple of seasons. So, what happens moving forward? Because if you look at some of the projections, the Angels have about $36 million between their obligations and the current luxury tax barrier. So they will have money this offseason to spend. How are they going to spend it? Yes, they have their own free agents, Andrelton Simmons. Conversation is that he won't be back. So they could use that money internally, or they could look to add some pieces externally. But again, after next season with Pujols, even more money comes off than the next season. So they will have the opportunity to spend over the next 2 to 3 seasons. It's just a matter if Minasian can come in and, I mispronounced that, but I forget what it is. So if he can come in and draft well to supplement the money and the talent that they'll bring in at that level. So shout out to the Angels making a decision. The Marlins have made a hire. And then there's the Philadelphia Phillies. And this one is a little close to the vest, so I'm going to do my best not to try to get emotionally charged here, but just as a Phillies fan, sitting back and watching what is taking place is it's an absolute embarrassment. I mean, it's a debacle. Every press conference coming out of Philadelphia, they say or do something once again that just makes you shake your head, or based on the actions that have taken place now and the comments from ownership and the front office previously just don't align with one another. So which one is true? Is it that, Andy McPhail is going to die trying to bring back that trophy to Philadelphia? Or is it that he is going to be cutting costs and not willing to spend any money both for his internal free agents like JT Realmuto or top-end external free agents like Trevor Bauer or George Springer? And who's making these decisions? Because free agency is here. The non-tender dates, like I mentioned, are coming up very quickly. And who's making those decisions? Because Matt Klentak, of course, was, demoted or pushed off to the side because he's still with the team. So he wasn't let go or wasn't fired, but he's not making any decisions anymore. So they were like, hey, we don't want to let you go, but we're not going to listen to you anymore. And since that time, Ned Rice has been the interim general manager for the Phillies. So they have had somebody with that title, but certainly not somebody who's going to be with the team long term. And then you also have a lame duck president in Andy McPhail, because it's been said that he will be stepping down after the 2021 season. I mean, everybody knows this was his last contract when he signed it. He hasn't been shy in conversation around, I'll be retiring after the conclusion of this contract. So we're going to have a president hire a general manager and then in a year step down, to which a new president could come in. And typically when you have new leadership that high up within the organization, they like to have their own people and their own hirees working for them underneath them. So if there is a hire with the general manager spot, do you even want that job? Because as a candidate, McPhail's leaving, so I'm going to have a new boss in a year. Will that boss even like me? Or are they going to want to work with me? And even if they do, give me the benefit of the doubt of having, another transition year. maybe you're looking at tops 2 years of stability within this opportunity. And, GMs typically get 3 to 4 years minimum in regards to show, positive outlooks or positive opportunities moving forward. So I'm not sure what you're looking at here. And, the type of talent you get is probably going to reflect the type of opportunity that you have out there. So, you're looking at former Marlins president of baseball operations, Michael Hill, or former Giants GM, Brian Sabian, Indians presidents of baseball operations, Chris Antonetti, Twins GM, Thad Levine, who's, recently stepped down. And a lot of these guys really aren't striking energy or, positive interactions into the hearts of fans. A lot of guys are looking at this going, okay, what are we doing? And then if we do hire somebody, like I said, they're going to get a new boss in a year. So there's quite a few conspiracy theories starting to be floating around out there locally within the media. And one of them is that the Phillies are trying to outweight Theo Epstein because similarly to Andy McPhail, it is known within baseball and throughout the circles that this will be Theo Epstein's final year in Chicago. And not only could it be his final year, but he may step down as soon as during the season. And then there are a few rumblings out there that he may step down after this offseason. He doesn't want to get into everything that's coming up with 2021 and those big decisions that are going to be made by the Cubs, such as tendering Chris Bryant, trying to extend Anthony Rizzo, working with Schwarber out in the outfield. These are decisions that you don't want to be made by somebody who is not going to be with the organization in the next couple of years. So similarly to Philadelphia, they're going, well, dude, if you're leaving anyway, we're not going to let you make a 4 or 5 year commitment to anybody, and then you're going to be out the door in 4 months. That's not how we want to work things. So are the Phillies possibly taking their time because they've had conversations behind the scenes and know the dates or the anticipated date to which Theo's going to step down, and that aligns more with how long they're willing to wait to add him to Philadelphia? But then if you're Theo Epstein and you're stepping down from Chicago, why would you want to go right back into the business and right back into the pressure cooker that is Philadelphia? I mean, you basically won the first World Series in Boston in 86 years, the first World Series in Chicago in 110 years, or 108 or whatever it was, and now you're going to go to Philadelphia where there isn't a long-standing curse or drought with championships, and the market itself isn't any easier than the ones in Boston or Chicago. So the pressure and the stress and all of that will still be there without the benefit of potentially bringing the satisfaction of a trophy for the first time in a century to that fan base. So I don't even know if Theo Epstein would be interested in the opportunity right away if presented by the Phillies. But again, as a fan, you're hoping they're having that conversation and they're not waiting around for Theo Epstein just to have him turn them down, and they still don't get their candidate. So, who else? The golden goose in Philadelphia is Eric Neander of the Tampa Bay Rays. People want to make him the president and basically push out Andy McPhail and say, dude, you're leaving anyway. It's time to get out of here now. Bring in Eric Nylander, give him a blank check because there's no luxury tax when it comes to the front office. And again, locally in Philadelphia, we saw the Sixers this past offseason write a blank check to Doc Rivers and Daryl Morey to get that organization run correctly. And then right across the street at the Phillies Stadium, it's just the complete opposite. They're cutting budgets. They're cutting guys. They're not spending any money on Real Muto. They're not spending money on top front office executives. And this is why that the local fan base is very upset with this team. And this is why the likes of Buster Olney on ESPN are writing articles around the fact that the Phillies are lost and they don't have any direction. And they're a big market team working in small market operation. And just hearing all of that with the TV contract and the money they have and what they've done over the past couple of years is very, very frustrating. So I don't know who it's going to be, but the conversation is finally that interviews will begin taking place this next week. We saw out in L.A. they could interview as many as 20. It's then going to go to a second round of 3 to 5 candidates and then maybe a third and final interview between 1 or 2 of them. So you're looking at a month here between a decision and with no, immediate, outlook into 2021 on how it's going to look in regards to games, minor leagues, dates, times, all of that good stuff. It just becomes chaos in Philly and not a positive feeling here within the city of brotherly love regarding the baseball team. So we'll wait and see who they hire, if anybody, or if Ned Rice is going to be running the show into 2021. But that'll do it here for the third segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. We'll step aside one last time here for a word from one of our sponsors and a word from our sister shows. But when we come back, we'll wrap things up talking news, notes, rumors, basically everything going on. We'll call it the mailbag, the trash bag, whatever it is here for our fourth and final segment. So stick around, everyone. We'll be right back.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
Welcome back to the fourth and final segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. I appreciate you guys listening in. If you could take a second here and please rate and review the podcast. I know I ask you guys every episode, but that does go a long way to helping us grow within the Apple Podcast Network. You know, for people searching baseball podcasts, it helps us show up in those searches, pop up in the new and noteworthy and trending and all of that good stuff that the algorithms like to pull different price points and data points from. So if you guys could click that star all the way on the right, wherever you're listening, leave us 5 stars, write a review, write a comment. If you guys have a question for the off season, let me know. I'd love to have a discussion with you guys on here, have some interactions, do a mailbag kind of pod style of thing. Let's do it. So if you have a question or a comment, leave your thoughts on who's going to go where does JT Realmuto end up, who trades for Francisco Lindor, where does Chris Bryant end up if it's with the Cubs, do they move him? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. We'll get those read. We'll have a conversation and we'll have a discussion around it, and it'll be a lot of fun. But here we are for the fourth and final segment of today's episode. We're touching on news, notes, everything going on across Major League Baseball. Starting off with, we're talking about the Phillies one more time here, but since they haven't made a move on the general manager front, it does look like they are going to have their pitching coach in the near future. The Reds' assistant pitching coach and director of pitching, Caleb Cotham, is the leading candidate. This is per Jim Salisbury of NBC Sports Philadelphia. He says that Cotham is, quote, the clear front runner for the job. And looking at Cotham's background, he played at the major league level a couple of seasons. He actually played for manager Joe Girardi and the Yankees in 2015. So Girardi, if he liked Cotham, bringing him in now to be his pitching coach, especially since they continue to search for a GM. This has to be all Girardi bringing in and making this opportunity. But Cotham's experience and another relationship that he should have within the Philadelphia front office is due to his connection with Driveline Baseball. So Driveline Baseball continues to be a data-driven kind of network or analytics that really interests pitchers, right? And Trevor Bauer is big on the Driveline opportunity. And the reason I mentioned Driveline is because the Phillies' minor league hitting coordinator, the gentleman who's in charge of working with every hitter at the minor league level, is Jason Ochart. And Jason Ochart came over from Driveline. And this has started to show benefits at the major league level because the Phillies are one of those teams that whether it's development or whether it's drafting, they haven't been able to churn out internal talent in quite some time. And for the first time in a couple of years, we're starting to see this. We're starting to see Rhys Hoskins, Scott Kingery, although he struggled, but Alec Baum has really talked highly of Jason Ochart and his development since being drafted. So when you see the success of Alec Baum, who finishes second in Rookie of the Year voting, and you hear him talk positively about the relationship with Driveline and Jason Ochart, you then start to connect the dots here and say, okay, Caleb Cotham, his relationship with Driveline, he just won a NL Cy Young Award with Trevor Bauer. So could he come in and potentially help Zach Wheeler? Could he come in and potentially help Aaron Nola take that next step and continue in their development? And I enjoy Driveline. I've had a couple of conversations with people in that world, and it's a lot of weighted balls. It's a lot of long toss. And yes, there's scientific evidence and experiments and data that show as to why you're doing certain things and where you should be at in your development during certain times. So I see this as a positive, and I think it's an excellent move for the Phillies as they continue to become kind of a new age organization. They continue to look more towards the analytics, the sabermetrics, while offsetting that with some old school style of thinking with Joe Girardi and a couple of other internal, Larry Boa, years and years of baseball experience there in Philadelphia. So certainly newsworthy notes, since the Phillies will probably be making that hire here in the next couple of days. But continuing to jump around here on last week's episode, or this past Thursday, I gave you guys an update on what's going on across the minor league baseball negotiations with Major League Baseball, where we stand, what's happening, what's the latest update. Well, it was announced this past week that Peter Woodfork will oversee minor league operations from Major League Baseball. So Peter Woodfork, he was appointed Senior Vice President of Minor League Operations and Development is his appointed title there. So basically, he's going to be running the show. So they're continuing to negotiate. They're continuing to figure out what's going on. But just brief background on Woodfork. He played baseball at Harvard, where he won 3 Ivy League titles. So Harvard, 3 out of 4 years won when he was there. That's very impressive. He worked for 3 years in the Labor Relations Department of Major League Baseball. He then became the Director of Baseball Operations for the Red Sox, Assistant General Manager for the Diamondbacks, and then he returned to work for Major League Baseball in 2011 as Senior Vice President of Baseball Operations, overseeing the umpire department. So he's got relationship with umpires, he's got relationships with labor negotiations, and he's going to report to Executive Vice President Morgan Swart in the Baseball Economics and Operations Department. So some of his titles or some of his responsibilities, Woodfork will oversee player development system, including licensed affiliates, partner leagues, and club player development departments. So basically, he's going to be a huge figure in trying to figure out, which affiliations will go where. As I discussed with you guys, that's one of the major holdups here is they need to come up with an economic plan. And then once they have this plan figured out, it then becomes conversation and a huge puzzle about figuring out which AAA, AA, single A level teams will be associated with which major league clubs, because you are going to have some change. You are going to have some overlap there. And the minor league system will certainly look different in 2021 than it did here in 2020. But a few other news and notes as we wrap things up here in segment number 4. The new rules for 2020. What's going to stick around? What's not? Of course, there were quite a bit of changes. Recently, Rob Manfred was quoted as saying, quote, "People were wildly unenthusiastic about the changes, and then when they saw them in action, they were much more positive," end quote. And in particular, Manfred would like to see the playoffs expansion be permanent moving forward, although he's looking at 14 teams instead of a 16-team format. And this is basically every major organization. I mean, the NFL went from 12 to 14, and they're set at that mark now. Then you have the NBA and the NHL at 16 teams. And one of baseball's kind of sticking points was that the 4 or 5 team playoffs, since it expanded, it used to be 8 only, but now it's 10, was that the extended importance of the regular season. And when you have 8 teams in each conference making the playoffs, we've seen it recently in the NBA where teams with a record of under 500 could make the postseason. We saw it this past year in baseball with the extended postseason that the Houston Astros made it with a losing record. There were a couple of teams in the playoffs with a losing record, and this is what I don't believe that Major League Baseball wants. I don't think they want a club that's, 80 and 82 making the playoffs moving forward. But again, more playoff teams, more playoff games, more playoff revenue, and that's better for Major League Baseball. Although the players could fight it, certainly that's not one that they typically push back against. But the other one that they're looking to keep is the runner on second base for the extra innings rule. And, players, they were against this on the first time around. I was honestly against this first time around. It got me thinking to growing up, watching my sister play softball and just kind of the rules that they go on, and it just seemed gimmicky, kind of childish to say the least. But, anything that eliminates 15-inning games, because the more you watch the game, the more it reminds you of old school baseball. So the old school baseball guys who say, no, this can't happen, this isn't baseball, it was kind of an interesting dynamic to watch the shift into old school baseball style of play if it is only for an inning or two. Because once you got to the postseason, and this is the case for the past couple of years, it just becomes a home run derby. I mean, every guy up there is just trying to hit a walk-off or a go-ahead home run, and this leads to either a fly ball, strikeout, or home run. And then you get the games of the 13th, 14th inning. Nobody's trying to bunt for a hit, bunt them over, drive them in. They're all trying to launch. They're all trying to end the game, and that's just boring baseball because all you see are fly balls, strikeout, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, because hitting home runs is extremely difficult to do. But when you put the runner on second base, you then have the first conversation of, well, do you bunt them over? Okay, if you bunt them over, they may walk the next two guys to walk the bases loaded. So you're taking the bat out of this guy's hand, and this guy's hand, and we're really going to have the 8-hole hitter up with bases loaded with one out as opposed to the 5-hole hitter up with a guy on second and nobody out. Or do you have him swing away and then he hits a sac fly and then you're in that situation anyway? Or does he hit away to begin with? And then if you're the opposing team, do you walk the bases loaded if it's the top of the inning? Or do you try to get out of the inning with just one run scored, thinking you could score more runs in the bottom half of the inning? I very much enjoyed this conversation and watching the different teams have different outlooks and different, kind of theories on ultimately which one would be best moving forward. So I like the runner on second base. I like the designated hitter rule in the National League. I'm not paying to see Aaron Nola, Zach Wheeler, Scherzer, all these guys hit. I'm paying to watch them pitch, so let them focus on that. Give me another professional hitter in there, and I don't see any issues. But the one rule that isn't going away that I think should is that 3-batter minimum. Now, this was due to trying to make games a bit quicker in nature. You had pitchers and hitters, every other hitter switching out, and I understand that. I am certainly one that thinks the game needs to be quicker, but the 3-batter rule, I don't know. I guess it's not a huge deal, but that one for me was just like, okay, that didn't do anything. We can get rid of that one, and nobody will blink an eye. But I like the other 3. I like them to stick around. We'll have to wait and see when it comes to the collective bargaining agreement. That's a huge loophole, or not a loophole, but a rabbit hole that we would have to go down to talk about what could happen there, what will happen. A grievance will most likely be filed by the players in regards to the 2020 season, and the conversations were not great. Now we're going to be right back there in 2021. If all of these individuals are non-tendered and don't have jobs anymore and guaranteed contracts, these players are going to be very upset and probably want even more in negotiations. And if they run back this agreement one more time due to the national emergency and the pandemic, where does that leave us heading into 2022 when the agreement fully expires? And man, there's just, we're going to get into that. I'm sure we're going to have full episodes discussing what's happening, what's going on, and what we think will happen moving forward, because a lot can change. Don't get me wrong, of course, with the coronavirus, the vaccine. There's communication from Rod Manfred that they're working to have fans in the stands. He believes the Championship Series and World Series was successful in having a limited number of fans. So even if it's 20%, 15%, it's better than 0%. and it makes more money for everybody, and trying to keep these economic losses to a minimum will certainly be one of the biggest obstacles that Major League Baseball faces for next season. But a few player personnel tidbits that have recently come out. A ton of teams are interested in Marcell Ozuna, up to 10 teams potentially showing interest, and a lot of people are saying that this is due to the DH becoming normal in the National League, which opens up his offer sheet to all 32 teams and not just 16 who could view him as a designated hitter moving forward. And then we've also heard Jackie Bradley Jr. could be prioritized by the Houston Astros. They're going to lose 3 outfielders this offseason, it looks like, or could lose 3 outfielders in George Springer, Michael Brantley Jr., and Josh Reddick. So they're going to have to replace those guys with somebody, and it certainly feels like Jackie Bradley Jr. is at the top of their list. But that'll do it, man. Another episode in the books. This one was a ton of fun for you guys here today. I know we had some things to discuss. The first female GM hired in the history of baseball, but not only baseball, but the history of the 4 major professional sports in North America. So shout out to Kim Eng, finally getting her opportunity 15 years later after her first interview to become a general manager. And then we had the Phillies sitting tight, the Angels hire a GM, and then, of course, news and notes here at the end of the episode discussing everything moving forward. But congrats to Jose Abreu, Freddie Freeman, all of the new hires across baseball once again. But that'll do it. That wraps up another weekend here, another edition of the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Do me a favor before you guys head out today. Check us out on social media. Please rate and review the podcast. You guys know the deal. We appreciate it here, and I myself certainly appreciate it. But that'll do it for today. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. As always, I appreciate you guys listening, and I'll talk to you again on Thursday.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.